welcome to this month's online Rooted Regional Group. We're really thankful that you were here to join us. My name is Cam Potts. I'm the senior pastor at LaGrange Baptist Church in LaGrange, Kentucky, and we are here today to discuss building healthy relationships between senior pastors and youth pastors. And I have a great group of friends here to discuss this with me today, so let's meet them. Chelsea, why don't you start us out?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Chelsea Erickson. I'm the pastor of youth and families at First Congregational Church of Hamilton. And I also serve with the Rooted team working with the blog as an editor. So
awesome. Really glad you're here, Chelsea. Thank you. Terrence?
Hi, I'm Terrence Shay. I'm at First Chinese Baptist Church of Walnut as the family ministry pastor. I'm here in Southern California, and I'm just glad to be a part of this call.
Awesome. Thank you, Terrence. And Isaiah?
Hello, my name is Isaiah Marshall, and I am the director of student ministry at Strong Tower Bible Church in Nashville, Tennessee. So I'm excited to be here and share.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to this for a long time, guys. I know all of our paths kind of cross a little bit at the Leader Summit, and so it's fun to do something together in this environment as well. So let's jump right into the discussion as we're thinking through healthy relationships between senior pastors and youth pastors. Initially, what would you say are some elements of a healthy relationship between a senior pastor and a youth pastor? When that's done well, what are the elements that make that healthy?
Oh, I can go first. I think that we all are kind of longing to serve side by side, right? There's a sense in us that I think as youth ministers, we want to be in step with our leadership, with our senior pastor, especially with our elders. And so there's this desire really to, as Paul talks about, to co-labor together. Think about, 1 Thessalonians 3:2, where Paul introduces Timothy that way. And he says, this is my co-laborer. Actually, he calls him a God's co-worker. And then he says that, we're working together for the gospel of Christ. And I think we long for that with our senior leadership in our churches, right? So there could be the sense of either, some cases it might be like, more involvement or less involvement than would feel healthy. And really what we're wanting is to, although there's a difference in leadership and authority, we're wanting to really work side by side together. So
Yeah, to add to that, I think expectations are everything. A lot of times conflicts happen not because two people are in different places or in different roles, but it's because they have unmet expectations of one another's roles and duties and responsibilities. And so if the youth pastor is in that role and the senior pastor has a role in the church as well, just be able to understand how each person can help each other practically and specifically, and also being able to have the lines of communication to be able to address issues as they come up, that goes a long way.
Well said. Isaiah, were you going to say something?
Well, I was going to say support goes along with that. The trust and a shared sense of mission, and just mutual support, not only from senior pastor to youth pastor, but from youth pastor to senior pastor as well. And so I think that goes a long way as well. Just mutually supporting one another in how we serve.
Yeah, that's really good. I think those are all really key categories to have in our minds, because it shows like there's deeper layers than just we're trying to get work done. We're doing ministry together. We're, like Chelsea was pointing out, we're co-laborers. We're striving side by side for the faith of the gospel. There's a depth to that makes that relationship so valuable and so important. So in light of those big categories, what would you guys say are some best practices of how to move towards that support, towards that clarity and expectation, towards that mindset of co-laboring and being servants together for Christ? What are some best practices that help cultivate that healthy relationship between senior pastor and youth pastor?
I really appreciated what Chelsea said about the quality of that kind of relationship between Paul and Timothy. So if we're trying to build a relationship between two co-laborers, it's important that they have the opportunity to engage with each other on a regular basis. Now, that probably differs depending on what church and kind of the rhythm of the church and how busy a church can or might be. But it certainly is important that the youth pastor and the senior pastor have some time on a regular basis to talk, to be able to discuss, to be able to pray, and certainly to be able to then evaluate ministries as they are going and to be able to see if they're all going in the same direction. A lot of times we don't make the time for the relationship part, and all we have is the accountability part. And that's also when a lot of times youth pastors could feel discouraged because all they have is the overseeing and not the relationship.
That's really good, Terrence. Really good.
And in thinking about that, we recognize how busy senior pastors could be, not only serving the congregation, but also serving in the community in some capacity. And so I think, being proactive and respectful about how we approach our senior pastors in engaging that relationship. And so I think some of it can also fall on us engaging and just reaching out and pursuing that relationship with our senior pastor, because they're not only our supervisors, but they're also our pastors. So.
Yes, very much so. And we can continue to talk best practices as well, but I'll throw another question into the mix of this. Are there things we need to make sure we maintain an awareness of as a youth pastor is trying to build a relationship with senior pastor and vice versa? So kind of combining two questions now, best practices, but also just things we need to have on the radar as we're trying to implement those best practices.
Yeah. I think one of the things, going back to kind of the conversation about authority and where's the authority in our churches spiritually, even as well as in a reporting structure, we recognize that there is a power differential and that there is also just a respect. That's, I think you mentioned, Isaiah, that needs to be there for our senior leaders. And that can make it really hard, I think, as the youth minister, to be the one initiating the relationship, right? So we would hope, obviously, that the senior leader would be coming to us and say, hey, here's what I want our meeting schedule to look like. Here's what I want our working relationship to look like. How does that sound to you? But there may be times, whatever the dynamics in your church are, I've experienced times where I've had to kind of learn, and still very much learning this, but how to manage up a little bit, like how to, without being offensive, hopefully, but how to say, hey, I would love for us to talk about this more regularly, or I would really value, this is something I'm struggling with. I would really value your input on it. So that it can take a little bit of creativity and a little bit of courage, I think, because we recognize that the senior pastor does have authority, and we have to kind of creatively, if that relationship isn't coming to us the way that we would hope, we have to be creative and respectful in how we initiate. So.
That's a good point. And I think if there is some kind of environment at your church, like if you have some kind of quarterly or yearly, review type thing or something that the senior pastor is doing with different staff members of the church, different pastors of the church, maybe you're finding some kind of natural window to bring it up like that. So it doesn't just feel like it's been dropped out of nowhere, or you just let yourself get so frustrated it just comes out one day. And but just to almost plan it for yourself and for the sake of the senior pastor, here's the window of time that would be natural for me to bring up something like that. And that's what I'm going to try to put that in there. But I think creativity in that communication is key as well, like you said, Chelsea.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts on things to be aware of or best practices?
I definitely recommend seizing the opportunities that we have seasonally and working with students, whether it's things that come up for the holidays or the beginning or the end of a school year. Naturally, we make our plans, but maybe one of the ways in which we could lead from that second chair is to approach then the senior pastor with the things that are on our mind to get their buy-in and to kind of desire their input. And that goes a long way in that it shows them you're taking care of your part, but then you're also valuing their input. And that strengthens the relationship too, because then after a while, they're going to see that, you're being responsible. I'm going to give my input because I would like to, not because I have to manage you.
Yeah, that's a great point, Terrence. I think that brings up another thought in my mind of things to be aware of, as far as just depending on your history with the church and how long you've been there. It's good to be aware of how previous youth pastors have functioned in your church, and even just what longevity has looked like. Because if there's just been a lot of turnover before you, a guy comes for a couple of years, leaves, another person comes for a couple of years, leaves. And when you show up, you're planning on being there for a while, but the senior pastor doesn't know that yet. And so he's kind of holding you at arm's length because he thinks, well, this person's probably just going to come for a couple of years and leave. So why am I going to establish some kind of, so it may not even be something about you personally. It could just be the history and culture of what leadership and youth ministry has been like that at that church that you're kind of having to work against from the very beginning. So I think even just communicating a desire of faithfulness and longevity and just your heart there could really set the right tone from the beginning.
Can I add one more thing to that? from the other chair, I think, is that sometimes we need to be aware of how much experience our senior pastor has actually had in youth ministry, right? And some senior pastors like him have had a ton. And so he's going to know, you're going to know as you work with your staff, how their jobs function day to day and the kind of highs and lows of it and the difficulties. But if your senior pastor hasn't served in that particular role in the church, then you might have to do a little bit more to bring him up to speed with what actually your job entails, like probably has an understanding of the job description, but maybe not how you're executing it day to day and what that's entailing. So that might be a point of conversation too, to just say, hey, can I with you kind of the overview of the ministry and the overview of my work week, month, year, some of the peak times that I'm working extra hard, that sort of thing.
Well, that's a great point. I think asking questions, going with a posture of learning and just sitting under their experience, not necessarily as somebody like you're going in like you don't know anything, but you're going in to learn, just like you'd want your senior pastor to learn, just kind of this culture of learning among your whole team, I think would be helpful for everybody. And I think it all goes back to what Chelsea said at the beginning. If we're all serving Christ together, we're all sitting under Christ together and ready to learn from him and learn from one another. He's put us on a team to make us more like him. And so this relationship is a part of that process.
Yeah.
What would you guys say to a youth pastor that's struggling to connect with their senior pastor? We all hear different stories and been in different situations where maybe it's not the best situation or maybe it's not ideal. What would you say to that person that's struggling to have a healthy relationship with their senior pastor?
One of the things that I would encourage a new youth pastor in is cultivating relationships with maybe an elder or another like teaching pastor or executive pastor, someone else who's on the pastoral team. If there is that disconnect and there is have been that history of trying to build that relationship and it's not there for whatever reason, I think, yes, cultivating that relationship with maybe an elder in the church or another pastoral team member, I think will be very beneficial.
Very well said. What else? Anything else on somebody that's struggling? What encouragement, what tips would you give them?
I would add for you to not be discouraged. In other words, it's not always the case that the relationship feels warm and fuzzy, but don't assume the worst. And that a lot of times your senior pastor might be making high-level decisions and trusting you with the ministries that you have. And so it doesn't feel so intimate or close or even near, but that you give the benefit of the doubt that you're on the same team and you can continue to move forward. Don't be discouraged. That being said, sometimes there are aspects of your relationship that are not healthy. So then it's helpful to be able to have people to turn to, like Isaiah said, for wisdom, for encouragement, or just to vent. That's helpful.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah, and some of those people might need to be outside your church, so that you're not creating, you're not triangulating or creating division, but looking for youth minister friends that are safe people you can. Sometimes it's nice actually, like through Rooted, when those are not in your local community, although here you all are meeting in RRGs, and we think those are great places to have these conversations and pray together. But also even I think Christian counseling can be a great place to vet, hey, like what about this is workable? And maybe I have something to own and need to work through myself, or what if it, as Terrence said, is maybe going to just continue to perpetuate and not be a real healthy situation. And someone who can help you to discern that it's hard when you're in the middle of it sometimes to know. So
that's really good. I would just add, pray for your senior pastor a lot. I think it's hard to harbor bitterness towards someone that you're praying for on a regular basis. So if there is a struggle, pray for that senior pastor, pray for yourself, pray for that relationship, and resist the urge to just throw out little comments about how hard it is to associate pastors in your church or other people in your church. Just do everything you can, like Chelsea was pointing out, to not just maintain unity, but to build the unity that y'all have as a pastoral team, because that overflows into the unity of your church as well. All right, last question, guys. What's your one piece of advice for a new youth pastor stepping in to this kind of relationship and this dynamic for the first time? What advice would you give to them?
My advice would be stick around. Longevity makes a difference. Now, this is notwithstanding certain situations in which it might not be healthy or wise to stay around, But generally, people take time to change. People take time to absorb information and to apply it. And God works in a way that's always outside of our plans. And so if you stick around long enough, the relationships will naturally grow stronger and deeper. And Lord willing, you'll see generations of children come through in even one household. And that's actually how the culture of your future youth ministry and your desires and your dreams will come true, in that it comes through generations, not coming through even 1 or 2 or 3 years.
One of the things that I would highly recommend, I know that has been huge for me, specifically when I first started in youth ministry, is getting connected to other youth pastors in the area. Because when we think about longevity, we think about persevering, I think that helps us when we have a group of other youth pastors that we can go to for advice, for healthy community, for accountability, who could just be a resource for us when we need someone to talk to, when we need to vent, as was mentioned. I think that will help us persevere. That will help us stick in there and have that longevity.
Yeah. Really good.
Similarly, I would just say, you're not alone if you're finding dynamics to be challenging. I think most youth ministers will relate to that on some level. And that's not usually a personal statement about your senior pastor. It's just that there are some unique challenges to the job that are tricky to navigate. So you're not alone. You have others who understand and are going through similar things likely, but also like abide in Jesus. I think that's our hope for fruitfulness and for longevity that you were talking about, Terrence, is just abiding in Jesus and staying close to him. So.
Yeah, I agree. I think just to kind of bookend our conversation with this concept, I think read scripture that reminds yourself that you are both serving to advance the gospel, to see God's people grow in the grace and knowledge of Christ, to see them rooted and built up in Christ. And so remind yourself of that often, and know that even the difficulties that are there, or the healthiness that's there, is meant to serve to that end, to help you personally be more rooted and built up in Christ, to help you personally bear the fruit of the Spirit. And so I think this is a key relationship opportunity to do those very things and to grow in those very things. Guys, anything else that you want to add or throw in before we wrap up?
Can I add one more thing?
Sure.
I think parents are essential in this whole entire process. They could be your greatest allies, but they can also be your greatest enemies. And so you want them not for the sake of just strategy to be able to be on your side, but really they're there to encourage and help and build up your ministry, because it's their children that benefit from it. So if you're able to get a couple of parents that become your allies, even to some extent your confidants, people that will pray for you, that'll go a long way. And even where they could become advocates for you, to the pastoral staff, to the deacons and others, because they know you well and they know your ministry and your vision clearly.
Yeah, very well said. Very well said.
I would like to add, I think for us to just remember that that we shouldn't take ownership of something that's not ours, in the sense that we are co-laborers in God's harvest, and he is calling us to join him in the work that he is doing. Yeah. And so we're just vessels and instruments that he uses. So encourage you with that.
Yeah, that's so good. So good. Chelsea, were you going to add something?
Nope, just agreeing.
Okay. All right. Yeah, this is so good, guys. I wish we had longer, but I know in the online regional group, you guys will have some great discussion about this. And please feel free to reach out to us. We'd love to continue this conversation, and we hope that the Lord uses this to encourage you and equip you to better serve his church and to proclaim the gospel. Thanks for joining us. Enjoy your discussion.